When you see a very big lake stop, face it, it's like 6 feet wide at the most through this huge forest that remains alive. It's like a ribbon of history.
All right, Jeffrey.
All right.
Montreal, 2,000 miles that way. Oh, bet that's cold.
I mean, people ask us why do we canoe as brothers, you know?
We tried it as sisters, and it's just too uncomfortable.
Yeah, actually, it reminds me a lot of my brother Michael.
But I sort of was thinking that our minds and our consciousness are in the late 20th century, but our bodies evolved over thousands of years. So there's something in there that draws us back to a more primitive existence. That's why I think that so many people feel that pull to come out to the wilderness.
Michael Peake.
Is this today?
It is.
Oh, okay. Hi. I just happen to be sitting here as I do all day long now, waiting for someone to contact me. And thank you.
You sort of look like a mad hermit during a pandemic. Are you all right?
Well, my hair is always, well, I'm thankful I still have it. It is quite real. But yeah, it's beyond the pale now. So I'm going to the dude mode. I'm going to buy a big cardigan and wear it back. So yeah.
Your hair has always been like that, Michael.
It has, but it's now beyond sort of where I would have cut it. So, well, you got to look the part, I guess. So I did dress up. I moved things around to the antlers there are usually up there in the light, but I moved them down, and the canoe is usually somewhere else. But Hudson's Bay flag and our flag from our trip, and even a flag from the from our from our Himalaya expedition, which I did in 1982. So,
man, you've done a lot of trips, Michael. Like a lot of trips.
Done a few. Yeah, we were very lucky to get a bunch done, and in the era, mostly before communication devices, we had no GPS, we had no sat phone for sort of more than half of our canoeing. Which I'm kind of proud of. So it is that there's a self-sufficiency there. Our big trip in '85, the 1,000-mile trip. Yeah, we did have a Spilsbury radio, which are those red radios you would see in the north, which have 3 miles of antenna you have to stretch out, and sometimes work, but it sounds like a science fiction project. But we got it to work when we needed it, but we would pick up Rankin Inlet from the Thelon River. You know, it's just like crazy, but we made it.
Don't look at the camera. Don't look at the camera.
Howdy there, Vicar.
Hey, buddy.
Yeah.
Vicar's always smiling.
If people don't know who Michael is, you have to vision going to canoe symposiums back in the late 80s, early 90s, and you would be the keynote. Like people would be lined up.
Big.
Yeah, you were big. Well, you still are. And so I remember going to those shows, and it was your brothers and a bunch of other friends would always go, and it was always this group. You were in the far north, and you would, I think, wear tuxedos one evening of the trip, and then open a velvet case of whiskey.
I think you're hallucinating there, but we did enjoy our luxuries, shall you say, and we did get pretty silly at times, but always safely. But we had some very, very good times.
Well, it is a Whisky Fireside Chat, so I've actually shared this already throughout, but this is one of my favorites. So
that's a new one because I saw you with an almost empty one in earlier.
Yeah. I you know what? There's a lot of dead bottles right here.
All right, this is my retirement gift.
Oh, I love that.
It is very nice, but I find I'm drinking a lot less. Jenny doesn't drink, but I drink sparingly now, which just because I want to. But cheers for you. I will always raise a glass.
Right.
So.
I think that's why I like whiskey. You don't drink a lot of it. It's more of a savior, or not savior. It is a savior.
It
But a
is.
savior thing.
That's a different talk.
Yes,
But,
that's right. Hallelujah.
I was interested to see that JR had, as you can see there, the famous grouse. That's my blended whiskey. Such a freak about it that JR had the same bottle too. A couple of years ago, they changed the bottle, and it looks like crap now. So I keep the old bottle and pour new whiskey into it.
Do you really?
You got to do something when you're retired, you know. So one of these days, I'll get a funnel.
And you retired, so I don't even really know too much about your real job. I just know that you paddle a lot and travel a lot.
My real job allowed me to do that. So I worked for 42 years for the Toronto Sun as mainly a photographer. I was photo editor, I was a columnist and different things, but mainly as a photographer. And the Sun had a great program put in by its founder, Doug Creighton. When you worked there for 10 years, you would get 8 weeks sabbatical, plus your vacation.
Wow.
8 weeks of paid sabbatical for
Wow.
you to go do something interesting. And of course, I did the trip we named the river, Eric Morse River. And then I subsequently had 3 more of them because I was there for 40 years. So they have eliminated that program now. It was bought by a giant corporation, so all that's gone. But it not only gave me the time, it gave me the ability, and this is what people were jealous about the Hide-Away Canoe Club, which is our group, to raise money and sponsorship, which you know all about. But we were very lucky to get some good sponsorship on major trips from Molson's, Via Rail, even the RCG, Royal Canadian Geographical Society, got a couple of research grants, things like that, because we were doing interesting trips.
Big day. That would be good right now.
Are we there yet?
Yeah, they can't here.
It's all downhill. Abe wants lunch. Canoe down gently. Unless you're in the northwest territory.
And people always say, how do you get people? How do you get sponsors? Well, first of all, you got to ask them, don't ask them what they can do for you. You tell them what you can do for them. It's not the other way around. We had something to offer. We could obviously do the trip with professional photographer, writers, and get it in the newspapers. So that's what we did and it worked for like 25 years. So
Yeah, I remember the one night we're in a small cabin in Maine, having whiskey. Then this is years ago, and the owner of Woods, the original Woods, I think his name was Mike as well, was it?
not David Earthy. That was
yeah, it was a while back, and he was like, Woods is no longer Woods, we know it, but he was Woods, and yeah, he would sponsor your trips. And I remember, you having conversations, and he would say, well, what are you doing for me this year?
David Earthy, yeah. No, he was very generous to us. He was the major bankroller in the Labrador Odyssey trip. We went up the coast of Labrador, through the Torngat Mountains down to Ungava Bay. That was a really tough trip, an expensive trip, but Woods was the main sponsor.
Well, so what inspired you to do all this?
I watched your talks. I caught up on some of the talks, and I watched the one with Cliff, my beloved friend Cliff Jacobson, who always says every time I see him, "You saved my marriage." And I'm going like, that's not usually what I do. It's the other way around, right? But we were both in Yellowknife at the same time, and he was heading off to get married on the Hood River. And we were heading off to go to the copper mine on Great Bear Lake to copper mine. And so they left that morning and early. So we go down, and we were leaving later in the day. We go down to L'Orange Aviation at the time there, and we just see a pack sitting in with all our other packs. I go, this is Cliff's pack. And I go, I kind of look at it, and you can see it's marked specially. It was the wedding dress for Susie. And so I told Bill Gollitz at L'Orange, and they ended up dropping it off to him next time they went up in that area. So he said, "Mike, you saved my butt there." So he always remembers me for that. But I always have time for Cliff. But he said there's a canoeing gene. And because I've listened to the other talks, my parents never once got in a canoe, as far as I know. I've never seen them. There was no family history of canoeing whatsoever. So if that gene is dormant and gets sparked by going to summer camp, I went to Camp Temagami as a child, 10, 11, and 12. And that, I think, sparked it. And then there was a canoeing boom back before you can remember, maybe in the early 70s. Canoeing became kind of really popular all of a sudden, kind of an outgrowth of the environmental movement at the time, the original one. So that's when we started. But it wasn't a family tradition. It was camp, So I went back. Our first canoe trip with a friend who I worked with went to Lake Temagami, where I had at least recognized the lake and remembered it, from 3 years of tripping there. So that's how it started, and then it just went up and up. And I have 3 brothers, and the youngest is the most adventurous, Jeffrey.
I mean, think about what we've done on this trip. We've gone from the Alpine to the ocean. This isn't some phony talk about history in a classroom. We're out here talking about it right in the channel here in a weather that a lot of people would say no thank you. And you know what? I like that. Like, I really feel like it makes me in some small way a stronger person.
So he's the one who's the whitewater guy. He became a wilderness guide out in BC. But we all had different talents, and some had none, and others had double. So it worked out. But and you look a lot like one of my brothers, actually, Andrew. But Jeffrey was the one who pushed us to go to do Northern Rivers, and it was the summer of 1980. We were supposed to go to Nahani, believe it or not, but I had jury duty. But that's when Bill Mason's book came out, and that changed everything. The effect Bill Mason had with Path of the Paddle was remarkable. And we all lapped that up like crazy. And Ned Franks, too. You shouldn't forget him. He's the Canoe in Whitewater. He was a professor at Queen's. And but there were books like that, and not a lot of them. And then the other piece was Complete Wilderness Paddler. That's John Ruggie and Jim Davidson, wonderful writers who later did Great Heart, which I consider a classic book about the Hubbard expeditions. But it was just a synergy, and it grew. And we did the Missiniaibi, but we started out with the French, Mattawa. We did all these little rivers and built up to it. Missiniaibi, then the Rupert, which can't even do now, right? Because it's all dammed and levied up. And that was big. That was a big river. And then we did the George, even bigger river. The George River, which we've done twice, is one of my favorite rivers. It's absolutely superb. Massive, massive river. Heavy moving water, but so clear and beautiful. And of course, the history, the Hubbard and Wallace expedition. So we just kept building up from there.
And you even got to the point where you named a river after one of your idols, Eric Morris.
Right. So Eric Morris, we discovered his writings, and we realized there was a connection through the school that my youngest brother went to, Trinity College School. Eric was friends with used to teach there, and he was friends with the headmaster, Angus Scott, whose son canoes with us. So we realized that he was we hadn't met him yet. And the Wilderness Canoe Association annual meeting in February 1984, Eric Morris was the guest speaker. And so we were fairly active members back then. So Jeffrey and I, my brother, were the party to meet Eric when he arrived at St. James Bond Church in Midtown Toronto. That was the name of it. And we escorted him downstairs and immediately threw him into a side room and locked the door and videotaped an interview with him. This is in 84. And we basically sat at his feet like little groupies all evening, and got to know him a bit. And Pamela was there, and it was a great night. And a day or two later, my brother Jeffrey said to me, why don't we name a river after Eric Morris? Because we knew I had the sabbatical coming up the next year. So I had 8+ weeks available. And I said, well, can you do that? I mean, how do you do that? What are the steps? And I looked to Jeffrey, and he'd already left the room. So it was sort of like, okay, I guess I have a chore. So I didn't know what to do. So I found out there's a thing called the Canadian Geographic Names Board, which is the body that puts names on mountains and lakes and streams and Dairy Queens and whatever all across the country. So I just phoned them up out of the blue. There's no internet. You just phone them in Ottawa. They get on the phone. Just inquiring about how would you name a river after somebody. So, well, there's a process. And says, and then the guy stops. Is this person alive? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, we can't do that, right? You can't name it after a living person. I said, oh, okay, well, all right. At least we know. Can't be done. I didn't think Eric would be willing to sacrifice himself for the naming of a river. But before I hung up, the guy asked, who were you thinking of naming the river after? I said, oh, Eric Morris. He goes, oh, Eric Morris. Eric deserves a river named after him. I thought, I think we're onto something here. And as the fates would have it, a bit later, in the June of '84, you may remember a famous walk in the snow. February 29th, 1984, Pierre Trudeau decides to resign as prime minister. So he's quitting, and the election is that summer. He disappears, but he makes one campaign stop in Toronto, where I, as a member of the media, made sure I was there to cover that. And of course, Trudeau had canoed with Eric Morris and was a friend and wrote the foreword to Eric's book on canoe routes then and now. And as there was a big crowd around him, and as he's getting into his car, I just was standing like 3 feet from him and said, we want to name a river after Eric Morris. And he turned and looked. He said, where? I said, in the Northwest Territories, flowing into Garry Lake. He said, when is this? I said, well, hopefully in the next year. He said, I want to know more about that. So get in touch. So we followed it up. And as it turned out, and this is where the fates are beautiful, the right to name a geographical feature is generally Ottawa's, or was for the territories, and each province has their own names for it. But Ottawa was just transferring the right to name to Yellowknife. So it hadn't been set. There were no rules in place. So it was like a window there before they put the rules in. And of course, all the top people in Northwest Territories knew Eric well and knew of him. And it actually passed the legislature there on the day we were on the river, on August 1st, 1985. Yeah, so it was a charmed trip. It really was remarkable. 55 days, starting at the Saskatchewan border and going to the mouth of the Back River on the Dubon, Theolon, Back Rivers. Remarkable trip, which you'll never duplicate. But we had a lot of other great ones, but that was trip of a lifetime.
Well, if you think about it, like he had a group called the Voyageurs, and they would go on trips, right? Do you think your group was sort of the aftermath of that?
Absolutely. We once we discovered that this Eric Morris and the Voyageurs. Now, if you're in the States, it's Sig Olson and the Voyageurs. So Sigurd Olson, a very popular writer, was kind of seen as the leader. He was the bourgeois, but we call him Eric Morris and the Voyageurs. But they had the same thing. This group of about 8 people. Not everyone would go every year, but they would go and do historical routes. And Eric recounts it nicely in his book, and how they discovered, they were going through Quetico and they saw the sign for the Grand Portage and Voyageurs Highway, and they said they were at Grand Portage, or Grand Portage, as Eric would say. And they said, oh, wow, yeah, this is quite the history line here. So off they went. Now they were older then, but I always remember they did the most famous trip is probably the Churchill trip in 1955. So memorialized beautifully in a book called The Lonely Land by Sigurd Olson. And it's it's made all the more enjoyable by knowing who the people are. I mean, he says their first names, but when you know who they are, it makes it more fun. But it was a trip that really captured the imagination of a lot of people. including ourselves. So, and of course we did that trip as well in their memory. But yeah, we became kind of, I called them once our elders in that sort of native sense. That we weren't directly, obviously not related, but they were people who influenced us and related. Now, the issue of naming a river after a white person in the far north. Now, this is 35 years ago. So obviously you wouldn't even attempt it today. But we were not, unaware of sensitivities of it. Now, we were just trying to honor Eric, and that's it. So at the end of the trip, we're in Baker Lake. And we kind of had a few extra days there. We're touring around. We go up to see the incredible cemetery and see where the bodies are buried. Father Bulliard and Moffat from the Moffat expedition, and all this stuff, so you want to find out. And then we go to the print shop, and of course there's a lot of great northern art. And we run into, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but run into this guy, and guess where he was born? On the Morse River. So I said, oh, well, and I explained what we were doing. And I said, what do you think of a group of white guys coming up from the north to name a river after another white guy from the south? And he said, I thought it was brilliant. He said, you call it what you call it, we'll call it what we call it. I mean, that's King Solomon of the Inuit. I mean, that's brilliant, It wasn't done to, be rude or, I say he wouldn't probably do it today, but it was just merely trying to honor someone we thought a lot of.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, why the north? I mean, you've gone to Algonquin, Killarney, and things like that, but you've always gone north.
Yeah, I often wonder about that, and for me, it's really about the wilderness. It's not about the canoe as much. I mean, obviously, I love canoes. It was really about the wilderness, and I don't really know what drove us there so strongly, but it was strong. I mean, for us to keep doing it every year. I mean, I love the whole routine of getting ready for a trip. And we left 2 great trips on the burners there that we couldn't get to. All had to be historically based somehow. We were following somebody's route, which generally meant we were going uphill and then downhill, right? So those were most of our trips were like that. And people, of course, think you're crazy, but they may be right. But it was a very strong, and this is why I wonder about the canoeing gene. It was a strong pull. It's almost like, I don't know why I'm doing this. It's like something's implanted in my brain, but I must go north. But it was very, very powerful. And there's not a day goes by I don't think about some aspect of those trips or our cottage in the north. And it's just there. And whoever put it there is not taking it away, and it will go when I go, I guess. So.
Well, you think about it now too. I mean, people still are doing that. There's Northern Scavengers. There's other YouTubers that are doing these far northern trips. Young people, well, relatively young people, and they're using different technology. Are you jealous of that?
In a way, I am. I mean, I see the quality that these. I put together a few clips for you, and they are crap. Our video. I didn't shoot the video. I won't say who did, Jeffrey. But there's a lot of zooming, and it's like 30-odd years old and stuff. But I'm just blown away by the quality of the new cameras and everything. But I don't think I would trade that. We were at the end of a period before that electronic ribbon connected to the north with sat phones and everything like that. We had to be more self-sufficient. I know when we went to the Pingualuit, the crater in northern Quebec, that was probably our toughest trip. We started following the route of Robert Flaherty, the guy who did Nanook of the North. But we started up by the crater, and we had it to ourselves. And then I know one canoeist, Laco, and they went there, and it's like now there's like a gate. It's a provincial park or whatever, and it's just like, no, monsieur, you cannot. They said you cannot canoe that river. You're not experienced enough. Well, he's extremely experienced and highly able, but yeah, they just think Joe Blow's coming up there, and they have no sense of the whole canoeing world. And you're just a Gorby, as they call the town. You're just a tourist there. Where's the popcorn? Where's the exhibits? It's a remarkable place, and you don't see it when you're paddling by it. It just looks like a ridge, right? You can only see it from the air. So for who knows how long, people didn't know it was there, because not that many people go there. It was discovered by American pilots in World War II who were flying reconnaissance up, looking for subs and all that sort of stuff. And it's it's 2.5 mile wide, 800-foot deep lake with a 400-foot rim in solid granite. I mean, there's one in Arizona, the Sandstone Crater. That's a pimple. It's in sandstone. It's like rubber, whatever. It's styrofoam. This is in granite. And when you stand on the edge, it's so big you can't even get it in one picture. And you look at the lights right, you can see, if you look up, you can see the ripple of the land caused by that explosion some 7,000 years ago, or whenever it was. But
wow.
I mean, stuff like that you love.
You even think about the technology. I remember you doing the Winisk River, and I think it was the first time you brought
That was our first online trip. Yeah. The second one. Yeah.
And the technology you needed back then to make that happen, which now, wow.
Well, our first called On River Online. So we got hip with the thing. We would transmit pictures every day. We had a sat phone that's the size of a circus trunk. It was 43 pounds, and it was 300 baud, and no one knows what baud is anymore, right? Like, it's like microscopically slow, and we only had a solar panel and stuff. So we did 4 of these trips, and by the end of it, we had a generator. It was lighter than the sat phone originally, but it was kind of cool. Being media people, we wanted to share. We share our stuff anyway, but to do it immediately and from the river, and that was a pain. You need a really good team, because you got to write, you got to edit, you still got to set up camp and make food and all that. So we really needed a solid team. So we did the George, and then we did the Winisk. And I wasn't as thrilled about going to do the Winisk, and I thought, wow, when I got there, what a lovely river. It's it goes off the shield there, but it is a boreal forest river. It's like in the far north, people say, well, what did you like? The area I love the best, it would be the Chipewyan territory, east of Great Slave Lake, in that area south of the Thelon. It's all these open areas with trees, kind of rolling, but just beautiful, absolutely beautiful territory. And we ended up going through there a couple times as well.
And all the changes too. I mean, I'm not a person to think of the past all the time. I'm always thinking of the future. But if you think about it, how has the community changed in ways of even motivation or ethics or skill or gear? Like, has it changed a lot?
Well, now that I'm not kind of plugged into it, it's hard for me to judge that. I can only see it through the media that I see. And I'm very impressed by a lot of these young people, but I'm also very wary of what mountaineers used to call peak baggers, without an E, like me, but people just want to do stuff and check it off and all that sort of thing. So it's hard for me to know. I mean, when I kind of got back into canoeing after a few years, just going on that Killarney trip a couple years, I hadn't been into a mech, co-op, as we still call it, store. And it's like, wow, look at all the great stuff they have now, all the gear. Because, you kind of get set with what you have and you just keep using it, right? But yeah, it's constantly improved. And obviously we we did seminars down in Maine and the Maine Canoe Symposium, and how to pack and trip. And there's definitely an art to it. I think there's a higher quality because people have more resources now. There's fewer, Eric, was it Eric, I think, or somebody told a story of a guy going down the copper mine or Missiniaibi with basically suitcases. Some German tourist, he had suitcases, and just like got off the train, went to, and someone put him in a boat. But, so that's not going to happen anymore, And there's the famous story of Eric's. They're on the copper mine and they met this guy, sort of famous American sort of guy, and they were catching fish. They kind of came up to them and canoes went together and they were fishing. They said, "Do you want? We're doing well here. Do you want to fish?" He said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So they catch a big, nice lake trout or something. And he wheels it in, pulls out a gun and shoots it. He said, whoa. He goes, yeah, I don't like him squiggling around in the boat. So, okay. Fish with lead, so takes all kinds. But yeah, I think there's a more uniform quality of tripper. And as long as you're respectful, and you have to be respectful of the North, is I have to tell you, but all you out there, I think most people know that. And there's enough resources that they can prepare themselves better. And of course, equipment's never been better. So, but you still got to do it.
What about still presenting? I mean, you were the keynote speaker for many years, especially at the Wilderness Symposium. Has that changed? I mean, think about back. We used slide projectors. Remember this 2 slide projectors that went together with music, with a cassette tape and all that stuff. Yeah. Has it changed to the point that the story has changed, or is it just technology?
Well, I see some online, but I don't go to the shows. I did go a couple of years ago. But when I first started out doing talks, the 2 projector with the music and thing was becoming a big thing in the 80s. And I said to the woman, the Toronto Camera Club, where I used to speak occasionally, hey, maybe I'll look into it. She goes, no. You are a unique speaker. Speak in your voice, tell your story the way you do. That's what's good about it. The music and all that is a different kind of thing. So I stuck to that. And I enjoyed it very much. I really enjoyed it. I just didn't talk to canoeists. I remember talking to a group of school kids, high school kids, probably the worst group you could have. A friend had a class and invited me over, and like grade 11 or 12, it's just like, okay, all right. So I'm showing the picture. I never forget, there are animal shots and beautiful nature shots. And one particularly nice shot came up and a bunch of people went, ooh. And then they realized, oops. They went, ooh, oh. Like they just couldn't take their reaction as, wow, that's really cool. It had to be, oh no, I'm making fun of it or something. I thought that's pathetic. You'll grow up. Don't worry. Little kids are great because they generally don't do that attitude thing. But seniors are a really good group generally because they're generally informed and they have some good questions. And but I do miss it. I used to do quite a few of them. I go down to the States and talk. And I remember going to speak to Sigurd Olsson Symposium in Wisconsin at his Environmental Institute. And I got to give Eric Morrison, the Voyageurs, talk in front of his family and everyone who was totally into Sigurd Olsson. So that went over really well, So those are enjoyable. I do like doing the talks. My last one was unfortunate. Technical problems marred it. And that's why I'm doing the book. I said,
and it is right behind you, right?
It is. It's right there.
Yeah. So this is like less than a year old. You self-published it.
Oh yeah, it's from Christmas. Self-published it because I actually went to Lake Superior just to write this thing. I went up and there's at the mouth of the Montreal River. There's a 1950s kind of camp there called Twilight Inn. They have a few cabins right on the lake, 50 feet from the beach. And I stayed there for a few days, and then I went to Red Rock, and there's an old Lodge, Quebec Lodge there, and I wrote there. And I found it very productive to be near Lake Superior. And the very first time we drove Superior, in 1976, we did our first long trip to Quetico, 17-day trip. And that was 76 in the fall, and there was a particular song that had just come out. And we're coming up there's that one hill you're coming up in the Trans-Canada. First time, you see all the bays, and there's one point where you actually see the whole lake. And this is back, we had an AM radio, and it was like, you could hardly hear anything. And as we crested the hill to see the lake for the first time, what song was on the radio but the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald? It was just like, oh my God, this is a sign, So, it's associations like that you stay with all your life, So I don't talk now. I give talks to myself. There's lots of applause, but I don't even have a cat anymore. So she left me. But I actually have an artist friend who who borrowed my slide projector. So she likes to project the things and look at it, because hard to beat the quality of a projected Quetico in terms of perfect saturation and everything. So whatever, however you do it, just do it.
Well, is that what happened? Did you wake up one morning and say, I'm going to write this book?
A lot. So many people have told me, oh, you got to do a book. You got to do a book. Yeah. And then there's people like you who just do book after book after book after book. And it was so good. Who was it? One of your interviews? It's like writing is hell. Like the blood coming. Who was that? It was somebody you interviewed, I think. I know, because Farley Mowat hated writing.
What?
And, or was it you or somebody else I saw recently? They hate writing. He just happened to be good at it, unfortunately. No, it must have been another thing I saw. But yeah, so I finally just settled down because I knew I had the pictures. I mean, I had decent pictures. I was a photographer. But what impressed me from people's reactions, like Roy McGregor and others, that it's good. Like, it's not great literature, but it's readable. And that's what I'm going for. So
yeah, it's a good book, really good book.
Well,
I was really excited to see it because I haven't heard from you for a while, right? And all of a sudden I see this book when I was flipping through online. I was like, whoa, wait. But it's interesting. I noticed all the photos and the storylines from the past. But what if you were like in your mid-20s? Would they still be drawn? Because they wouldn't remember what you did.
No. And it's not. I tried to base it on like Lonely Land. What it's like to travel with a group, the humor, the tough times, the exciting moments, the beauty moments. That was my sort of template. I also added in, and a couple of American readers who've seen it say, that's very cool, because I knew Eric Morris, I knew Bill Mason. And in fact, one of the proudest moments of my life was when I happened to bump into Bill Mason in downtown Toronto, and he was with Wilbur Sutherland, who was his money guy for the movies and stuff. He goes, oh, Wilbur, this is Mike Peake. He's Mr. Canoehead in Toronto. I was like, I have been like blessed by Bill Mason. Like, that was so cool. But, you just do it.
Yeah. That's really cool. So what's next? I mean, you've written a book. You were a keynote speaker for many years. You traveled to the far north. You actually drink good whiskey. What's next?
I think I'll have to drink more. But, I used to be great, Kevin. Thanks for reminding me.
No. I've known you for many years, Michael, and you're not that person to say I used to be.
No, and also the reaction from this book, obviously friends have bought it and stuff like that. It's done through Blurb, which is a self-publishing, and they really do a good job. It's quite impressive. It caused me to say, I'm going to do another one, the full book. Not that book is primarily about the one big trip, but they'll be short. It'll be more like magazine pieces, right, on each trip, because it's not our trips that excites me. It's the history. Talking about Robert Flaherty. And everyone goes, who's Robert Flaherty? No one knows Robert Flaherty. Yeah, well, everyone knows Nanook of the North, or at least that name. They'd all heard of that, whether it's a joke or the real movie it is. It was actually filmed in Quebec, not up on Baffin Island. George Douglas, from not far from where you live, in Lakefield. The Remarkable Lands Forlorn story. The Hubbard and Wallace story these are great stories. Great, interesting stories. And this Professor Jacques Rousseau out of Laval University traveled all over northern Ungava. We did a lot of Ungava trips, northern Quebec. 3 crossings of Ungava and 2 on the George and 1 on the Korak. So that is one hard-ass, tough place to canoe. Not friendly, but very rewarding. So each of these trips, and we did a trip in 90, and we arrived going from Hudson Bay to Ungava Bay, up the Korak River, the other Korak River, down the Payne River, and or Arnaud, as it's called sometimes. And the native people at the far end of the trip, we finally arrived, said, the first people to do that trip in 40 years, because they remembered Professor Rousseau from 1948, who had done the trip. And there's actually a movie on National Film Board across Arctic Quebec.
At every rapids, keeping close to shore, we shoved on the bottom with our poles and paddles, using all our strength. our muscles would vibrate like fiddle strings while the canoe moved forward inch by inch against the current. Several times, almost at the top of a rapids, and needing only 1 or 2 shoves to be over, your paddle would slip on a smooth rock, and down you'd go.
Which describes the trip. So that is cool to me. I find that really interesting. I find the fun, exciting stuff is in the past, and knowing that those people there, I don't care to be the first person down a particular river, because that means there's no history. And history is what it's all about for us. And we work very hard to come up with these historical things. So for the new book, there is so much more online now. Professor Russo's pictures are now available. I've got permission to use them. Shots of natives paddling into Mistassini Post in 1947. Canoes full of kids coming for their annual meeting to buy stuff and everything. It's just remarkable. There's a great shot of him covered in mosquitoes too, his face. So the irony is we're farther from those days. But because of the internet and the research, we're closer because we can see. And when you combine a place you've been and know with where someone else has been and put them together, it's a good story.
Every falls meant a portage, and we soon learnt the routine. Land, unload, paddle the empty canoe as close to the falls as possible, carry everything around the falls to the upstream side, and load up again. We did all this 4 or 5 times a day, and for a while, we 4 white men were nearly dead. After about a week, though, we all toughened up and were nearly as good as the Indians.
Mike, what was that? First of all, is it Michael or Mike?
Whatever you like.
I've actually always called you Michael. Michael, what was that book you sent me?
Well, talking about research, which is our big kind of thing, I got this copy of this book this winter from one of my former subscribers who lives in Germany, who discovered that the writings of Critchell Bullock were available. Now, he was the guy who lived in a cave in an esker in the middle of the Northwest Territories in 1924 with 24-25 with Hornby. And it paints the most intimate picture of what it's like, what Hornby was like and what it was like. And they were inland, so viciously cold and brutally terrible conditions. And by the time they made it out, and there's actually a picture of them where they left cans of film stacked on an island somewhere on the Thelon, and they made it out, and all their furs were destroyed because they had so much smoke. But it really gives, I mean, for someone that lives in Germany to come up with this and written very well in English, it's remarkable. But this is what I mean by there are discoveries coming out of the modern technology from stuff we just didn't know about. So it was so cool to see that book.
That's cool.
One thing I realized when I retired, I was, 42 years. People say, well, what are you shooting now? I don't even shoot pictures anymore. I don't have a camera. I do, but I don't use it. I just use my phone. I had my time. It was done. And I don't regret it. I had a great time. A very, very lucky life, and timing my age, and had a job for 42 years at the same company. No one does that anymore. And so I had nothing to complain about. But, when the time comes, you move on, and then you write a book. Maybe that's my salvation. But no, I'm not pretending to do these big northern trips. I couldn't do those. Went to Quetico with my son, who's 24 now. Big strapping guy. So we went to Quetico a couple of years with him, just him and me, father, son trip. We'd been to Killarney and stuff. And it was like, I went to do the portage because I know I've been there like 7 times. And, I loaded up the way I always load up, and it's like, nope. Because I used to carry 2 packs, right? One across the top, and then I can't do this anymore. It's very humbling, but very handy to have a young man along with you who can do it. And it was like, so we were trying to go, we started at French Lake, we were trying to go into the middle of the park, and it's just like, I remember one day, it was like lunch. We just stopped for lunch. It's like, wow, fantastic campsite here. Oh, we're just staying here, like, we're just staying here, like, forget it. So, that's the way it should go, and it was a great trip. I love Quetico. I know you've done a lot of stuff up there. I used to know Shan Walsh, who was the park naturalist. Yeah. He set up trips for us and stuff. So I have a very special place in my heart for Quetico. So I could still go there again. It's actually easier than Killarney.
Well, to sum it all up then, does it matter where you go?
No, but it matters if it's in context. I want to know where I'm going. I want to know who's been there before. I want to know what they did and what the history of the area is. It's not necessary. It's just like, you don't have to put salt in your soup, but it's a lot better when you throw some spices in there. So I think that's the analogy. I mean, it just enriches everything. So that's hopefully what I can keep doing to some extent. Like I said, I'm supposed to be there right now. I booked this week for a solo trip, and perfect, absolutely perfect weather. But that's way to go. I got to talk to you instead.
I know. I'm supposed to be in the woods right now too for the whole week, and
because the bugs aren't out yet. So you really want that just after Victoria Day is always a good time.
Oh, and the trout are biting for sure. I can guarantee they'll be flipping in my boat right now. But yeah. All right, sir. Thank you very much. And do you think that someday? This is actually a really weird question. I didn't even keep to the script, by the way. But
you never do. I'm grateful.
Okay. But do you actually think that maybe one day a river should be named after not maybe just you, but other past paddlers that have done all this?
Well, I wouldn't care for that. Like, I would like to know that what we did was remembered and have a record of it, and put your little piece in that giant puzzle that so many have. But I wouldn't necessarily. Why, are you planning something?
Well, I was thinking maybe a tributary or a creek, maybe a swampy pond.
Peak Creek.
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
Yeah.
A swampy pond, a rivulet, a freshet.
The Michael Ditch.
Son of a ditch. All right, I'll take it. Work on that. Talk to Justin Trudeau. Maybe he can do something.
Yeah, I got the ins. Cheers, my friend.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to talk to you again, as always. All the best.
Congratulations, gentlemen. You are now finished an official Hide-Away Canoe Club trip. It's not easy to keep up with the Peaks. Now, that's true now.
By the way, your annual dues are due immediately.
Immediately.